Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, make sure you head over to the Potown store in the next couple of days because they have a 50% discount going on up until the 2nd of December, so definitely get the stuff while you can cash in on those sweet deals. For today's video, we're going to be going over the Sword and Shield things that have been released so far. We don't yet have the full set, of course, but we're starting to see images of the first handful of cards, and I think because there's of course a new mechanic coming from Sword and Shield, I thought it would be worth addressing that as well as all the cards that we've seen so far. I did do this on stream just the other day, but that was a lot more casual, and I wanted to collect my thoughts in a bit of a more sort of structured way. So we will start off looking at what our February 7th set will be featuring Sword and Shield. It's going to have 50 Pokemon from the Galar region, or more than. 17 Pokemon V, and 12 will be full arts, and that's going to include Zacian and Zamazenta V. I imagine the 5 that are not full arts might be some of the ones that already revealed, the legendary ones that we've also got a bit of scope on, so that's what I imagine it's going to be. The other 12 will all have full arts. There's going to be 4 VMAX Pokemon. We'll be looking at that mechanic. Snorlax and Lapras are 2 VMAX Pokemon that have been revealed from our main set. 35 trainers, including 4 full art supporter cards, 1 special energy card, and over 200 cards will be the size of the set. So again, looks like Pokemon are sticking with big set sizes, a little bit less than some previous ones recently, but 200 is still pretty sizable. And you can get a good look at some of the artwork for the packs and all that stuff. You get to see the 2 VMAX Pokemon on the pack arts there. You get to see a Morpeko, which is terrible, but it's just going to be a nice promo there, and all that sort of stuff. There's also a promotional Meowth VMAX box coming out, a special collection. So I guess I'll just start with these cards, because they're basically filler, but we can talk about the VMAX mechanic. So for those of you who remember Mega Evolution, this is essentially, VMAX is basically more or less Mega Evolution mechanic merged with tag teams. And what I mean by that is VMAX Pokemon give up 3 prize cards, just like tag teams, but they work very similar to Mega Evolutions, where they will go on top of regular V Pokemon. Regular V Pokemon only give up 2 prize cards. So think of V Pokemon as regular GXs and these as Mega Evolutions, but you just don't need the stupid Spirit Links anymore. So it's far better than Mega Evolutions ever were, which is fantastic. So yeah, that's the basics of VMAXing. I think we will see a combination of Gigantamax Pokemon, like you can see here, as well as just VMAX stuff. So do bear that in mind. The Meowth promo, like I said, kind of fillery. The regular Meowth V has 180 hit points, is a colorless, has Payday, that's a 1 for 30 and draw a card, and Slashing Claw does 3 colorless for 130. Nothing really jumps out at me here. And then the Meowth VMAX, obviously the first thing to note is that mammoth amount of hit points up here. We're pushing that 300 barrier. I think physically being 300 is pretty bad, but there are stuff that have more than 300, and that's where it gets relevant, right? Because 300 right now is something that Mewtwo can hit, like on turn 2, but above that is, out of reach, which is actually very relevant. So this particular hit point, it's weird to say 300 is bad, but 300 is actually, like, not the best. As soon as it goes above that 300 mark, it's like an extra energy for, like, a Heatran or a Turtonator or a Blacephalon, all those multipliers of 50, and you're also out of range of Mewtwo. So 300 is not great, but above that is really, really important. And G-Max Gold Rush does for 4 colorless, 200, and draw 3. 200 in this day and age will be knocking out Dedennes and 2-shotting VMAX Pokemon. So that's like kind of fine. Getting the additional draw is like good, but when you compare this to something like Charizard Breaks In, for example, where for those 4 energies they can tutor 3 cards from their deck instead at like a -20 of damage, which is basically still doing the same thing of killing Dedenne and 2-shotting VMAX. And also the Charizard Breaks In has a much more relevant typing, as you'll see later on. So ultimately, this is just going to be a collector card, but no doubt these cards are going to have a beautiful look to them. Just another note, once again, I'll show you what the VMAX cards look like. Going to have a black border all the way around. You can see a big V encroaching on the card here. And you get the VMAX rule on the max cards. You can see as well they've played around with the positioning of weakness, resistance, and all that sort of stuff. So aesthetically, I think these cards are going to look phenomenal. So yeah, just overall, I really do like the design of V Pokemon, and it's a huge improvement from, I think, tag teams, and a huge improvement from Mega Evolutions. So overall, I'm not too dissatisfied with VMAX. My concern, of course, is how crazy high hit points are getting, but, you know, power creep is only natural. Once again, shout out to PokeBeach for all this information. It's where we're going to be looking at all of the reveals right now. So you can have a little bit of a look into VMAX in general, and we have 2 more here to discuss straight away. We have the Lapras and Snorlax. I should actually get the lower forms up first, right? So we'll look at the lower forms of these cards. So Lapras V is a 210 hit point basic 2-prize Pokemon. That's pretty chunky, right? 210 hit points just from the off. Think of VMAX as well as being like regular Pokemon going into GX Pokemon. Like, remember when you would evolve like a 60 hit point Zorua into something with 210 hit points? Now it's like the basic is already really tanky and solid, so you just won't get donked. And if you've got nothing going on, like if you can't find your Lapras straight away, you've at least got this guy to fall back on. So Lapras in his own right is like a reasonable card. As you can see, it allows you to attach a water from your hand to this Pokemon, then switch with one of your bench. That's reasonable for one colorless. You can try and like protect your Lapras V whilst also get acceleration towards the G-Max pump, which I'll get onto in a moment. So this initial attack, not actually that bad. I mean, it's not doing damage and it's not all that good, but it helps protect this card as well, which is pretty decent, because you probably don't want to start off with him. You probably want to get some acceleration towards that G-Max pump later on. It does also have Ocean Loop for 3 water and a colorless. You do 210 and return 2 water from this Pokemon to your hand. I don't think that's all that solid. I think usually you should have G-Maxed by the point you're at 4 energy cards. If you haven't, something has gone drastically wrong. But yeah, I think the initial attack is solid. Its hit points is very, very solid. And it's like better than just a vanilla evolution style card, because there's bits that can help you along the way. Looking at Lapras VMAX, it does look pretty impressive to me, to be honest. 320 hit points, like I said, fantastic. It puts you out of range of a bunch of different things, and it's going to make you, you know, at least a 2-shot. So this is going to stay in play for, like, definitely a turn. And G-Max Pump for 3 colorless does 90, plus 30 more for each water energy attached to this Pokemon. So if all 3 of these colorless are waters, you're doing a base of 180. That's decent numbers, of course. You can one-shot the Fire Week tag, the Water Week, the Fire tag team GXs. You can knock out Dedenne, and you can 2-shot VMAX. This also scales even higher, so you can play around people doing some healing with like Malolana stuff, or if they have, you know, like the choice helmets, or the there's a new tool as well that gives things more hit points in this set. So the fact that this goes above that 180 and you can just scale the attack seems very, very promising. We know that water has help from Quagsire and a few other things, so I think this Lapras shows real promise. I think its high hit points is great. Its typing is very relevant in the format, and its damage output seems definitely reasonable. One thing I will say is that 180 isn't like the best of numbers, but 210 is still a good number. There are plenty of V Pokemon that have around that 200 baseline of hit points and around 210. So getting 4 energy on this card is going to be very, very solid for damage output overall. So I'm excited for the Lapras VMAX. Its lightning weakness isn't super relevant. There is a very strong Tapu Koko V that we'll talk about later. But in terms of weaknesses right now, lightning's not the worst one to take. It's going to be interesting to see if Pikarom can sort of make any sort of comeback into this meta or not. Obviously, it's outclassed by, you know, 80 hit points at this point by opposing 3 prizes, or in some cases like 100 hit points on the Snorlax VMAX. So that's like a big downside of Pikarom, but Mega Lopunny Jigglypuff is probably going to get worse because there are more people playing a combination of GX and V cards, as the V cards in general will probably be like the stronger of the bunch. So that is currently one of the reasons why Pikarom is scared in the format, as well as a few other things, of course. But this weakness isn't like the absolute worst out there, I would say. Looking at the Snorlax V, before we go on to the Snorlax VMAX, 220 hit points, again, just a huge sponge in those early turns, which is awesome. Its attacks aren't super relevant. A Swallow up for 60 allows you to heal this Pokemon the same amount of damage you did to your opponent's active. You know, again, the sort of spongy element is all I can really turn to here. And it also has falling down 170 and send yourself to sleep for 4 colorless. I don't think any of that's relevant, so this is basically like a vanilla high hit point style Pokemon, and it's going to be all about going into the VMAX. This is the big selling point card, and I do think he is very, very strong indeed. 340 hit points is a lot. It's just a huge amount. We don't yet have confirmation if this counts as an evolved Pokemon. It does say evolves from Snorlax V, and if that's the case, it has access to triple acceleration energy, and that's where this card gets super dangerous, because Gmax Full does 60 plus 30 more for each of your bench Pokemon. Obviously, you can have a maximum of 5 bench Pokemon, so Gmax Full will be doing 210. Like I said, with the Lapras with 4 energy, 210, going to be a pretty good number for knocking out opposing V Pokemon. Going to be good enough to knock out Dedennes easily. And hopefully is going to be enough to be two-shotting VMAX cards. So, yeah, I think Gmax Full seems very strong. Snorlax seems like a very decent card right now. Obviously, it's vanilla. It doesn't hit a lot of weaknesses or whatever. But we've seen things like Eevee Snorlax and Megalopuff in the past. If their damage output is just good enough, there's enough acceleration in the format, like this could be a welder target even, you know, that's not out of the realms of possibility. So there's plenty of ways that you can try and power this guy up and for him to be a threat. So I foresee Snorlax VMAX being a pretty good card. Let's have a look at some of the other V Pokemon that have been revealed. So the 5 things that weren't getting full arts, I'm assuming is going to be like Celebi, Regirock, Victini, Koko, and Keldeo. I think it's going to be those 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's kind of what makes sense for me, because I think these are all like, I don't know if they were released differently in Japan, but they're like mythical collection cards from Japan, I believe. So yeah, I think those will be the 5 that we don't get full arts of, just from like a logical standpoint. That's kind of what makes sense to me. And remember, we're only getting 4 VMAX cards total. So there's a possibility that Indeedee V and Stonejourner V are going to be getting VMAXs. I'm pretty certain it won't be Zamazenta and Zacian, because their cards like already stand up on their own as very strong. And at the same time, in the video games, they have like, they sort of oppose Gigantamax things with their own like attacks. If ever you've played the games, like when you're in max raids and stuff, Zacian and Zamazenta both have attacks that are specifically trying to target Gigantamax Pokemon. So I think they'll just stay at regular Vs and won't VMAX just yet, at least. Anyways, let's check out the Celebi. 180 hit point grass type. Find a friend. Allows you to grab a couple of Pokemon. Line Force does 50 plus 20 more for each of your bench Pokemon. So it's similar to the Snorlax in terms of the damage that you're trying to rack up just by filling up your board. Obviously on a 20 multiplier and a 50 base, way worse than the Snorlax. So I think this card is overall pretty poor. Obviously grass types are still struggling in this format. Welder is still going to be a card, even with the rule changes to supporters in the Sword and Shield meta. I do believe Welder decks will still probably be a thing, or at least decks that have an element of Welder in them. So I don't see Celebi V being much of a card. Indeedee V, as I said, this could easily just be a platform for a VMAX, and I think if this is a platform for a VMAX, it's an excellent card. If it's just this and we don't get a VMAX, it's absolute bulk. It's a 180 hit point Psychic type. You'll notice that Psychic Pokemon now are weak to Dark, and resistance has been increased to -30 rather than -20. There's a theme here as well. You can see the Galarian Ponyta shares the same weakness and resistance, so it's not just this Indeedee. But yeah, 180 hit points, basic 2 Prizer. Watch Over allows you to heal 20 from your active Pokemon. So this is obviously like not the strongest ability out there right now. We've got things in the format, like we've had this ability on non-GXs a bunch of times previously, and it's not been super relevant. The only real time it's been relevant was when you're using it with Celosaur, with like your little Shaymins. But that was because they were basically like free prizes that your opponent could take, but then it wouldn't affect the actual prize race. Whereas in DDV will certainly be a relevant thing if people pick it up off the bench and knock it out, because it's 2 prizes for them. 180 is a pretty easy number for people to hit. So, yeah, I think this ability is pretty poor, but if this is just a stepping block up to an Indeedee VMAX, having these just chilling on the bench, getting you some additional value, sounds really good. So I think the ability is either irrelevant or super strong based on how good and if this gets a VMAX. Psychic does 10 and 60 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. I think it's reasonable. I think it's, again, reasonable. It's not super insane. You wouldn't play just an DDV, but if it does get a VMAX, that attack is certainly passable. And we know that Psychic types also have acceleration at their fingertips. So, yeah, I think this card definitely shows promise, especially if it gets a VMAX. We have a Keldeo V, 210 hit point, 2 prize Pokemon. It has Wave Splash, 40 for 1, which is meh, and the Secret Sword, 50 plus 30 more for each water attached to this Pokemon. Again, it seems like you're just a smaller Lapras, so I'm pretty sure this card won't see a lot of play. Regirock, 220 hit point V Pokemon that has Raging Hammer. You do 30 and 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. Pretty slow, pretty reliant on like tanking hits and stuff. Obviously, you're likely to tank hits if you're the amount that you have, but you know we know that we can hit more than 220 in one shot, so pretty weak. And Rocky Tackle also seems pretty slow. 2 fighting in the colors, you do 190 and 30 to yourself. Nothing barnstorming here. Not too impressed by this card at all, to be honest. It does have the increased damage buff of things like Diancie Prism for a little bit longer, but it's not going to be super relevant. Stonejourner seems a little bit more reasonable. Again, same thing with the Indeedee. If this is just a sort of platform card, it seems pretty good. If this is it seems pretty bad. 220 hit point, basic Pokemon that only gives up 2 prizes. Again, it's very, very good. These are all stats. You can't deny that they are strong. Guard Press doing 40, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 20 less from attacks. Now, this is where Diancie does get a lot better, because suddenly you're hitting 60 for 1. That's certainly relevant math against evolving Pokemon, and that seems pretty decent to me. So Guard Press seems like a really good attack if this is just a platform up to a Stonejourner V, which we don't know just yet. But it also has Mega Kick that does for 3 fighting, 1 50. Obviously, thanks to weakness, you will be knocking out Dedenne, and if you have Diancie, you'll also be knocking out Dedenne as well, even if weakness wasn't a thing. So yeah, Mega Kick seems reasonable. 150 is enough to be 2-shotting V Pokemon with the help of Diancie. You go to 170 into 340. And of course, this has relevant typing against Snorlax. You can one-shot the Snorlax. 170 goes to 170 goes to 340 with weakness. So Mega Kick doesn't look that bad, and this could easily be the sort of check to Snorlax if it does get a V card. If it doesn't get a V, it's probably irrelevant, let's be honest. We then have a Tapu Koko V. I think this card, raw stats alone, is very solid. It's a free retreater with 200 hit points, which is insane. It's also a Pikarom target that isn't a GX Pokemon, so again, helpful around low puff, right? If you have this card, it means that you don't need to play Zeraora, because you can just be like pivoting into this guy all the time. And you're full blitzing onto a card that also isn't a tag team a lot of the time, or at least have the option to. So you're going to be far better off against Mega Low Puff as Pikarom going forward. So this one card does, well, possibly does bring the deck back into being a relevant threat straight out the gate. And again, this typing is a threat to Lapras, so straight away the 2 VMAX cards that we've seen in the game do have a couple of cards that they have to watch out for right now, also in the same set. Spike Draw does 20, and you draw 2 cards. The fact that this is a 1 energy like poke, never underestimate this, just because you have the power scaling of Electro Power, so you know you can just like knock out some little basics if you just roll into Electro Powers and get a bit of extra card draw. Not too shabby at all. And Thunderous Bolt does 200. 200 is really, really strong, actually. We know that like 260 isn't a bad number to hit with Tag Bolt. Sometimes you would just do Tag Bolt GX just for that raw 200 damage output effect. And if you go to 260 with a double Electro Power, obviously Mewtwo have gone back to playing Rainbow Energies, which is very good for like this number in general. And hitting that 1 Electro Power is enough to knock out all these other like V Pokemon hit points before they VMAX, even these guys. So I think that's super relevant. 1 Electro Power gets Thunderous Bolt into really good shape, so I think this is certainly a relevant card. This Pokemon can't attack next turn, but that's fine. You pivot out of there. So yeah, the Tapu Koko V looks very impressive. Victini V seems okay. It's a 190 hit point fire type that has Spreading Flames. Attach up to 3 fire from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way that you like. I mean, fire never really has a problem accelerating energy in the first place, but if it's turn 1, it's an attack you can certainly use. And do bear in mind the Sword and Shield rule change does mean that we can't use supporters on our first turn. And that might mean that things like Acrobike and Dedenne obviously get even more powerful in decks and more important in decks, so you can get some card draw even going first. And I mention Acrobike specifically because it has discard synergy with fires. So if you just happen to be using your first turn to cycle with all these trainer cards and Dedennes and whatnot, Spreading Flames could be relevant for you, so not something to just completely ignore. An Energy Burst does 30 times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. Yes, it's the same as Gardevoir GX, but no, I don't think it's that relevant because fire types have access to such insane attacks anyways, that this probably won't scale all that incredibly well unless there are some huge decks out there that are trying to get a silly amount of energies on board. But I think the times are sort of changing because Gardevoir was a cheater, don't forget. It was able to accelerate its own fair energies very easily. It was able to access DCE and 3CE at times. So, although we can cheat a little bit with Welder, I still think that Energy Burst is kind of subpar damage a lot of the time. We then come to two very impressive V Pokemon, Zacian and Zamazenta. I really think these cards are very, very strong, both of them in their own rights. We'll start with Zacian. This is personally my favourite one because it seems like a very nice aggressive card, but I think naturally these two will probably pair up into the same deck because they use the same energy costs. Well, they use the same energy type, and it seems like they both complement each other. I'll go into the reasons why in a moment. We'll start off with this Zacian V. It's a 220 hit point basic Pokemon, which is nuts. And it has the Intrepid Sword ability. Once during a turn, you may look at the top 3 cards of your deck and attach any number of Metal Energy cards you find there to this Pokemon. Put the other cards into your hand, and then if you use this ability, your turn ends. So, at the very worst, this is a draw 3. And at best, it's like a draw 2, accelerate 1. And that's really, really strong, I would say. Again, going back to the rule change, this is something that we really have to bear in mind when evaluating cards. Drawing 3 cards, even if you've gone first, is super relevant for you. Really, really relevant, and it just gives you decent hand advantage. I think this ability is best when you go first, actually, because you can get a manual attachment. You can try an Intrepid Sword, and then next turn all you need is a manual attachment to Brave Blade. If your Intrepid Sword misses the Metal Energy, that's still fine, because there's actually a Metal patch in this set as well. So, yeah, I think Zacian 3 V has an excellent, excellent ability at its side, and Brave Blade seems to be a pretty decent, like, very, very decent, actually, in terms of efficiency, the amount of damage you can churn out. For these 3 metals, you do 230. And during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. 230, again, great number. It knocks out other basic V Pokemon. It'll easily be 2-shotting VMAX, even if they're using like Malolana Healing sometimes. You're still 2-shotting a lot of them, so that's obviously very good for you. And the fact that this Pokemon can't attack next turn, you're probably going to play a high switching count anyways. And I can already just imagine this being a Jirachi engine with Zacian and Zamazenta, to be honest, because you have because you have Metal Patch anyways, you naturally want this card to be chilling on your bench regardless. So yeah, it seems like Brave Blade is just super efficient, good damage, easily enough to knock out Dedennes and stuff again, which will still be relevant going into this format. Dedenne probably just gets better with the rule changes, to be honest. So yeah, Zacian V sounds insane. If you're not content 2-shotting VMAX cards, we also have Zamazenta that can put a shift in when you start seeing VMAXs hit the field. Prevents all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's VMAX. So here's where the combo is really powerful, right? The Zamazenta walls out VMAXs, and the Zacian instantly knocks out things that haven't VMAXed. So you're going to catch people on both fronts no matter what sort of deck they're using, which already just sounds excellent. Zamazenta has an extra 10 hit points on Zacian, 230, and it has the Assault Tackle attack for 2 metal and a colorless. You do 130, and discard a special energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. That's pretty reasonable. There's not that many super relevant special energies around. It could be a bit of a pain in the neck for Mewtwo. It could also be a bit annoying for the Guzmahala engines of ADP that love to pick out a unit or a rainbow for themselves just to guarantee that turn 2 GX attack. If you just assault tackle that, they're really sad, right? Because they've not been able to achieve their ultimate ray. They'll have to like try and use an End's Resolve or something like that. So yeah, Zamazenta V sounds excellent in that regard. Also bear in mind, of course, that these two cards have part metal energy in their attack costs, or all metal for the Zacian, and ADP could actually also be in this deck as well, right? There's no reason why ADP couldn't sneak into this deck, just so that when you are using Brave Blade on other V Pokemon, you're taking 3 prizes, or if you're using the Zamazenta to like wall out VMAXs, you can take a VMAX Pokemon out for 4 prizes. So yeah, metal typing, good. A potential of this card just becoming a one-of in regular ADP that we know like right now in the game, even if it doesn't become like a full Zacian Zamazenta deck. So yeah, this card sounds really good. Also a quick note on metal typing, you'll notice both of them have this sort of thing. Weakness to fire, resistance to grass. Resistance to grass now, I believe that's an indication that poison types are once again going to be on grass cards. For those of you who haven't been in the game long enough, there very much used to be, well, every poison card used to be grass type. If you look back at like, you know, fossil or jungle cards or base set cards, all the poison types were grass. So I think this is an indication that we're getting poison types shifting back over to grass stuff. Also, bug is resisted by metal in the games, right, I think. So yeah, just a quick change to weakness and resistance there. Some of the other cards that we also have seen so far, Galarian Zigzagoon. It has the Tantrum Head ability. Once during a turn, when you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may put 1 counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So it's Flash Bite from Crobat G from way back in the day. I think this is obviously worse than Crobat G because it has a retreat cost, which the Crobat never did. Crobat had a bunch of instant pickups to reuse it, which made the Crobat G specifically very insane. Whereas this card has none of that support just yet. So I think this card is pretty weak, but damage modifiers are damage modifiers, and sometimes an extra damage counter here or there is all you need to push towards a knockout. So it's a card that we have to bear in mind because we have been really calling out for damage modifiers. Here's the Metal Saucer. I'm calling it Metal Patch, but it may well end up being called that in English anyway. You get to attach a Metal Energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Metal Pokemon. So it reads exactly the same as Aqua Patch and Dark Patch, the predecessors to this card, now for Metal typing, getting some love. I should mention, of course, that the Metal decks, they have Frying Pan available, so they don't just get wrecked by the Welder stuff. So yeah, I think Metal Saucer, obviously a very strong card, obvious synergy with these two V cards, which seem super, super promising and powerful. So yeah, I think that's going to be great. We have a Fishing Rod. Now, I'm split on this card. I don't actually know if it might be better than Super Rod. It's very strange to think of it like that, because it only allows you to shuffle 2 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. So most of you straight away will be like, this is way, way worse than Super Rod. But in terms of a deck thinning scenario, oftentimes if you're only trying to cycle like a key target back, it's better to only get 2 targets rather than 3. I remember a bunch of games that I've had when I used to play Super Rod in my decks. I was just trying to get back a couple of relevant pieces, and then an extra card would have to be put into my deck, like sort of making it jankier, you know? So there are some reasons why this card may be considered better than Super Rod, but its overall power is obviously weaker. So you have less recovery potential in one card, but in terms of a deck thinning prospect and only getting the relevant stuff back into your deck, it could be good enough. So I think this card is actually reasonable. At first, I was like straight up angry about this card. I was like, why don't they just give us Super Rod? Super Rod's been fine this entire time. But this could be a low-key buff in some situations. In this iteration, it does compete quite poorly to some of the other recovery pieces we have, at least for energy cards. But in terms of competing with recovery cards, this is still probably the best we have. So yeah. So that's what we have for this page. We'll go on to the theme decks that have also been revealed. The V starter decks. You can see there that you get some Holo Shenanigans. This is the Japanese products right now. as well. And there's a few more cards that have been revealed. Ultimately, all of these Pokemon that I've seen are like just filler cards. So I think there are actually no relevant Pokemon here outside the Vs that we've already seen. So I'm just going to be going down to the trainer cards. If there are any Pokemon that you thought that were worth discussing, we can go over it. But I look back at my stream and I was literally like, these are all garbage whenever I looked at them. But yeah, I mean, some great artworks and stuff in this set. I like the way that cards have been designed, but ultimately they don't seem to be competitive. So here are the trainers that are new. Hop is a remake of How, Sharon, Tieno, all of those draw 3 cards. Professor's Research, Professor Magnolia, discard your hand, then draw 7. Yeah, super powerful card, obviously. Like, duh, what a twist. This card is strong. Now, the thing that is interesting is that this card is called Professor's Research, Professor Magnolia. And that might come into play that you can only play 4 Professor's Research in your deck. And Magnolia is like a subtype of this card. So it may be that in future sets we'll be getting more, or maybe even in this set, we'll be getting more cards that are called Professor's Research. And then you have to have a trade-off of picking what different powerful supporters and what combination you put in your deck. So in terms of a deck building approach, I really like that direction. I think it's very cool. It's almost like we're going to have like 4 ace specs in everyone's decks, and then you choose which are the best researchers for your particular build. So I'm excited for that as a deck building aspect, if that's what I think it's going to be. So I'm hoping we get a couple more options in this set, and we also get like a few more down the line, because that could be really exciting and really help diversify decks, rather than everyone being like, duh, we're obviously playing 4 Magnolia, isn't everyone? I want to have a deck building challenge for us to discover and explore. So that card is very interesting, as well as obviously powerful. There's Marnie as well, which I think is a super strong card. It's an upgraded version of N. Both players shuffle their hand to the bottom of their decks, then draw 5 cards, and your opponent draws 4. So it's not quite the same as Judge, because you're guaranteed to not draw back into any of the cards that you just put to the bottom. Neither's your opponent. And at the same time, you're getting a +1 over your opponent, so it's no longer a symmetrical effect. It is legitimately unfair in your favor, which is pretty strong. So yeah, people have played Judge often, and now you get to play Marnie with no risk of drawing back into the cards that were unplayables in your previous hand, which is also very good for you. So yeah, definitely relevant. We have Bede, which attaches a basic energy from your hand to one of your benched. I think this is clearly quite weak. We've seen how... Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? You have to accelerate from hand, which is always pretty weak. We've had so many iterations of this sort of effect, and basically because it's just accelerating from hand, it's always been pretty weak. That said, people have been willing to roll the dice with End's Resolve in specific decks like ADP, and maybe now we are more comfortable just playing Bede in ADP to guarantee that turn 1 GX attack. So maybe I shouldn't completely write it off. Maybe there are going to be some specific cases where this is just good enough. But previous predecessor like style supporters, like think about things like Zinnia and Mina and all of the stuff that basically isn't Welder, all shape up pretty poorly. So the fact that this is universal does maybe give a bit of creativity, and maybe there will be those random cases where this is just good enough, even though it's not an ideal card, because acceleration is still acceleration. So giving the game universal weak supporter acceleration is interesting to play around with for sure, I would say. Quick Ball, busted card. I'm super happy to see this card in the game. We really have been calling out for Ball Search, and finally we're getting it in 2 different forms here. The Quick Ball is specifically good for basics. The Evolution Incense is good for evolutions, as the hint is in the name. You can discard a card from your hand and then search your deck for a basic and put it into your hand. It's that simple. It's a half Ultra Ball for only basics. So in many worlds, this is better than Ultra Ball. If you're playing an all-basic deck, it's better than Ultra Ball. That's simply it. And if you're playing a deck with a combination of basics and evolutions and VMAXs, which easily could be the case, this isn't quite as versatile as Ultra Ball, but it's still going to get you a lot of good stuff. It gives you great outs to the Dene GX. It gives you because obviously Cherish Ball is like way worse now. If we're going to play a combination of Cherish and a combination of GX and V Pokemon, this pretty much instantly overtakes Cherish Ball if we are playing some of the new cards in your attacking style decks. So Quick Ball sounds absolutely phenomenal, to be honest. We have Evolution Incense, which is allowing you to search your deck for a evolution and put it straight into your hand for no downside, and I think that's really important and good. Obviously, evolutions needed something like this. It's been far too long that they haven't been relevant enough cards, and I think this is going to be an excellent include for a bunch of evolution decks and hopefully make them more viable. I don't yet know the ruling on this being able to grab VMAXs. So again, this is kind of similar to the trip acceleration thing that I was asking about earlier. I believe the VMAXs should be searchable via this card, so it could be useful in those decks as well. We have Fine Band, which is a fine card. People are going to meme about this because it's half as good as Muscle Bound. It literally is half as good. The Pokemon this card is attached to does 10 more damage to the opponent's active, so it's literally half a Muscle Band. But as I said, damage modifiers are still good. If that plus 10 is relevant, it'll still see play. So this card could easily still see play, even though it's half as good as Muscle Band. Poker Kid allows you to search your deck for a Pokemon and put it straight into your hand. I think with the Ball Search cards that we've just seen, we don't need to have Trevor in our decks, so Poker Kid. Probably too late to the party. Rotom Bike, certainly an interesting card. It draws until you have 6 in your hand, and then your turn ends. So it's kind of like a Tropical Beach style effect, but in an item rather than in a stadium card, and it's obviously only one use. But the thing that is worth noting is that it's really hard to draw cards on turn 1 going first these days, because you can't play supporter cards. So any item draw really does have to be given a lot of respect. So I think this Rotom Bike is something I have to play around with. I think it's one that you may just instantly be like, man, this looks terrible. I would never play that in any deck that I'm playing right now. But we have to see how things change with the rules, you know? You can't just fill your deck with like 13 supporters now and that's going to be your entire engine. You need to have a lot of trainer search to get Dedenne to draw you cards, just for those those games where you go to, first, and you want to have more item draw, and this is powerful item draw, at least when you're going first. So something to bear in mind. I think ultimately it's probably going to be below the bar, but I thought it was worth giving you the spiel about item draw being really, really strong. Giant Charm buffs hit points by 30 and is universal. Gaining health is good, keeping yourself out of range, and yeah, seems like a decent card. Team Yell Grunt puts an energy from your opponent's Pokemon into their hand. So yeah, just remove an energy but straight into their hand rather than like a Flare Grunt. So this seems kind of weak, especially because you can just combine Will with Crushing Hammers to guarantee discards. So I don't think it's that good. It's an anti-tempo card rather than a control card, which doesn't seem great. We get Switch back, Potion back, Crushing Hammer back, Pokemon Catcher comes back, which is actually more relevant than you would think. Because, of course, Great Catcher, which has recently just come out and has gone into a whole bunch of decks, cannot target VMAX Pokemon. So I think when Sword and Shield comes out, there's a genuine chance that we will go back to A, customs, or B, Pokemon Catchers. So that's going to be weird. Getting Coin Flip Gust meta back sounds awful. So I think custom Catchers is probably going to be the way to go going forward. Great Ball comes back, but it's probably too late to the party now that we have the better Ball Search stuff. Energy Search, Energy Switch, Energy Retrieval. Pokegear gets a reprint, as does Power Pad. Citrus Berry allows you to heal 30 damage and then discard from a Pokemon. So this is just straight up worse than the buff of 30 hit points, because Citrus Berry doesn't help you out against one-hit KO, whereas the Charm obviously does. And this is only a one-use heal. PCL comes back, Rare Candy comes back, and I think that's all we got there. There's one final card that's been revealed from Sword and Shield, and I think it's one that's hugely contentious among everyone who has spoiled themselves off the card. It's a Cinccino, it's a stage 1, 90 hit point normal type Pokemon, and we have the ability Thrifty. Once during a turn, you may discard a card from your hand. If you do, draw 2. We've got Trade on a non-GX. It's back in the game. And wow. I think it's far more balanced as a non-GX. because of course this can't be an attacking threat. Seeing so energy assist just as 40. But attaching energy from your discard to one of your bench is actually a good like anti-control card. So this is an anti-control card in terms of you get to draw cards and you also get to recover energies that people are trying to hammer off you. So I think this is really good for that aspect, just naturally. And it has its niches for sure. Now it is much more comparable to being like, is this better than Zebra? Is this better than Pidgeotto? Because it feels like they're just all in the debate together. Obviously, having 90 hit points makes you less searchable than Pidgeotto, but far less vulnerable than Pidgeotto. So there's that sort of trade-off going on. Same thing for Zebstrika. Zebra is stronger if you're just developing one stage 1 on the board, whereas if you get the Cinccino into play, you can use it every single turn. If you get 2 Cincinos into play, it's way better than having 2 Zebstrikas on board. So this is just another card that sort of gets its hat thrown into the mix as non-GX draw support, and I'm really happy to see it. I don't think you should be losing your minds over this card. We only see sparing amounts of play for Zebra. Pidgeotto has seen a bit more play. It's kind of been the basis of a couple of decks out there right now. So that could well be the case for Cinccino as well, especially because we have better ball search now. But I don't think you should absolutely be losing your minds over it. But I think it's a super solid card at the same time. So yeah, that was my thoughts on the initial cards revealed from Sword and Shield. I am a big fan of how they've done VMAX and V cards overall. At first, I was quite worried about the raw hit points that I'm seeing here. But at the end of the day, they've printed such powerful tag team Pokemon and powerful attacks available that more or less, if they wanted to sell Pokemon cards, they had to go above 300 hit points because they made Mewtwo too good, basically. So it's not super surprising that we're seeing this, and I much prefer VMAX, like I said, to a tag team format, and I much prefer it to a Mega format. So I think we have some brilliant catch cards available. They're going to have sweet designs. They look aesthetically very good to me. And nothing I've seen has completely had me shaking in my boots just yet. I think everything looks reasonable, powerful, can come into instantly come into decks and change up the game, and can also just make decks on their own. I've actually missed out these 3 stage 2s, my bad. So we'll go over that before I do my full wrap up, because there are some relevant cards here for sure. Cinderace has the Libero ability. Once in your turn, when this Pokemon moves from the bench to your active, you can attach 2 fires from your discard pile to this guy. I think that's actually pretty good. Obviously, you're a fire type, and you can be pressurizing the Zacian Zamazenta style decks. You may need to play labs in your deck so that you actually go through the frying pans, but that's certainly reasonable. 190, good number. You're 2-shotting every non-fire weak. You're 2-shotting every non-fire weak VMAX, and you're knocking out Dedenes, and you're knocking out Zacian Zamazenta if you play labs. Naturally, playing labs means you'll have a better time against Malamar because you have 170 hit points, blah, 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 blah. And Libero just means it's really easy for you to chain your Pokemon. Stage 2s in general have much better search now. Rosa is going to love having like evolutionary incense available to it. And naturally, Libero just means that you can keep looping Cinderace quite easily. He just sets himself up. And if you're just naturally playing a bunch of switches and like a Jirachi engine, you're never going to be that inconsistent. So yeah, this card actually seems pretty reasonable to me overall. And probably the most promising just because of his type coverage alone. Rillaboom seems promising for a completely different reason, and that's just being an ability. Voltage Beat allows you to search your deck for 2 grass energy and attach them to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. So it's basically Vikavolt, but now it's all one typing. In many ways, that's way better. Vikavolt used to have to struggle with what sort of counts it had to play. Like, did it play 5 lightning, 7 grass, something like that? Now you get to just play a full vanilla count of grass energies, which means you can usually get more voltage beats throughout the entire game, more value, basically, which is excellent. And you are limited in terms of the attackers you can play to, like, colorless and grass stuff, which there aren't, like, a huge amount available out there for you. So it's going to be sort of down to seeing what the card pool is like to see if this ability will actually see a lot of play. But again, with things like Rosa in format, it's actually pretty easy to get a stage 2 up, especially if it's going to be a stage 2 just to help you accelerate stuff. So this card seems super promising. I think the least promising of the bunch is Inteleon, unfortunately. Shady Dealings. When you evolve into this guy, you get to search your deck for 2 trainer cards, reveal them and put them into your hand. Trainers does not mean items, of course. This could also help you get supporters and whatnot. But you're usually spending resources to get this stage 2 in play. Those resources could have just been used to get the initial stuff you were going to try and find from these 2 trainers. So I think overall this card is the weakest, especially because it has no real attacking intent here. Aquabullet is pretty poor, and sort of being a Pokemon like, we've seen Alolan Ninetales GX, and that's faded out into obscurity. Obviously, Alolan Ninetales only gets you item cards, and this is more versatile in the ability. It's way harder to get into play because it's a stage 2. So at the moment, Inteleon's a bit of a no for me. The other 2 definitely seem like they could have their niches, especially if Zacian Zamazenta becomes a top-tier threat. So yeah, now it's time to wrap things up. Hope you did enjoy my discussion through Sword and Shield. Hopefully got you thinking about these cards in a competitive standpoint, and hopefully got you hyped for the new set coming out in the turn of the year. So thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Bye.